Hello everyone and welcome to a Hero Arts video. This is Jennifer McGuire. Today I wanted to share with you a way that you can stretch your stamps quite literally and get a completely different look. I'm using some fun new stamps from Hero Arts and I'm going to show you a really easy watercolor technique. It's a very easy to control watercolor technique, which is great for stamps like this that are very detailed, so you don't want the water to go too crazy, so you can really control it with the technique we're going to do today. We're using two new Hero Arts stamp sets. The first is the Stamp Your Own Succulent stamp set that you see here, and the second is this Yes stamp set that actually comes with matching dies, but I'm just going to use the greeting that says Thinking of You. I really wanted to stamp the Thinking of You message on the pot of my succulents, but the pot isn't big enough, so you can see there that it didn't fit. So I'm going to show you a trick for stretching this stamped image. Now before I do so, I need to make sure that my stamp is good and clean. So I have my Hero Arts scrubbing pad and my Hero Arts Ultra Clean stamp cleaner. This is a great stamp cleaner. I spray one side with the cleaner, I rub my stamp on it, and then I rub it on the other side to clean it off. And then I just wipe it with a baby wipe, and then I can be sure that all the ink is removed from the stamp, even if the stamp is stained. Part of these really good quality stamps is that they do stain. However, the ink won't transfer onto your project. I have some watercolor paper here that I'll be stamping on, and I also have some wide sticky post-it tape here. This is just good for masking. You could use scrap paper here if you want to. I'm going to mask off the bottom of our pot, and then I'm actually going to mask off the top of the pot too, because we're going to put flowers in here, and I want to be able to mask that so we don't see the back top of the pot when we do additional stamping. So I'm inking this up with the black Hero Arts dye ink. This is great because it works for watercolor. And I'm just going to stamp that portion onto my watercolor paper. I'm working on the smoother side of the watercolor paper just because it's more forgiving. Okay, so now I have the top of my pot done, but not that back rim because we want to put some flowers in there. I'm going to go ahead and stamp the sentiment so I know how big we need this pot to be, how tall it needs to be. I'm also inking this with that same black dye ink and stamping it right where I want it to be on the pot. Now after I've done this, I can go ahead and clean off that pot stamp once again because I want to make sure that's good and clean because I'm going to stamp it but in a different position. So you'll see what I'm doing here. I'm going to clean it off really well, and then I'm taking that same masking paper and I'm going to mask off the top of the pot so that we're inking up just the bottom of the pot. So I'm going to actually stamp this lower. So I'm going to stamp the bottom of the pot underneath our sentiment. So what will result is the top and the bottom of the pot in two different pieces, but we'll connect it with a black line. So I'm actually stretching this image and making it taller. So I'm just going to come in with a black pen that I know is permanent. This happens to be a Copic multi-liner, and I'm just going to fill this in. This trick of stamping an image in two parts and then connecting it works really well with flower stems or tree trunks or anything that you want to extend and make longer for your card. So you can see I have the original pot on the right, but we ended up stretching it and making it taller for what we have on the paper. So now I have this post-it tape again. This is 2 inches wide, and I'm actually going to use this for masking paper. If you have regular masking paper or just typing paper with some temporary adhesive on the back, you could do that. But I think this 2-inch wide roll of post-it tape is fantastic because it's inexpensive. There's so much on there, and it's wide enough for most stamped images you would want to do masking with. And by the way, this tape is from Scotch. Okay, so I have cut one out and I'm going to line it up and put it towards the top of our pot here. I cut the back lip off once again. This is going to be a mask so that when we do some flower stamping or succulent stamping on the top, it doesn't overlap with the pot. So I'm going to go ahead and plan out where this one here, I'm going to actually stamp twice. I'm going to stamp it once onto our watercolor piece here and again onto another piece of watercolor paper. This second one I'm going to cut out and pop dot onto the first piece, just kind of there in the bottom front. You'll see in a moment. Now I'm going to go ahead and pick another succulent and stamp this with the black ink over to the left-hand side. And then I need to do a little bit more masking. So I'm stamping these two succulent images onto that same sticky paper, and I'm going to cut these out. Now, this takes some time to cut these masks out. However, I keep them with my stamp so that next time I come along and use the stamp set, I already have my masks cut, so it's really quite helpful. Now the second succulent, I'm not actually going to cut out. I only am going to cut out part of it, the part of it that I actually need for my masking purposes, so that right-hand side. That's another way to save some time. So now that I have my two masks on these two succulents, I can go ahead and ink up my third here that I'm going to stamp kind of in the center back. So anything you want in the back should be the last things that you stamp after you've put your masks down. So I've stamped that piece, and now I can remove my mask and look at that clean, crisp image that you get with doing the masking. I really think masking is a great technique for stamping. Now for this last one, I don't really actually need a good mask. I'm just tearing off a piece and sticking it down there because we're going to pop dot that last succulent that we have on the other piece of paper right over this area. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but I wanted a little piece of succulent sticking out to the right over there. So now I can peel that off, and we can go ahead and color these two different pieces, and then we'll assemble them together in the end. Now it's time to do some watercolor. Now I love watercolor, but sometimes it can be tricky or time-consuming when you're coloring in tiny little images such as these succulents. So here's a trick for you. Take any kind of marker that is good for watercolors, such as distress markers, and pick out some colors that you want. You can see the different colors that I'm using here today. Now what you can do is color these markers right onto your watercolor paper. Really, you don't have to spend much time at all. Just kind of scribble them in onto your images, and then we're going to blend them afterwards with a touch of water. So first I'm going down with the succulent in the back here. I'm putting down some Shabby Shutters, which is a light green, then a darker green, which is called Peeled Paint, just towards the bottom of each of the little petals. And then I'm going to come in with Dried Marigold, which is like a soft peach color, and putting that on the tips. So now I have three different colors on here, and you can see I didn't spend any time to blend those. And I'm going to bring some moisture to this to blend them like watercolor. You could use a water brush or some water, but I'm actually going to use a product called Wink of Stella. This is a kind of a liquid shimmer, so it's like a shimmer marker, and it's got a brush tip, but it really controls how much of that moisture comes out. It's just enough to blend these colors, but not so much that you end up with a mess or something that's hard to control. The other advantage of this is it has some shimmer in it. Now when it runs out, what you can do is open it up, take that black piece off that you see there, fill it with water, put that black piece on, go ahead and screw the tip on again, and there's enough shimmer in there that you can get a second life out of this. You could even completely empty it when you're done, take out all the shimmer, rinse it out, and fill it with water, and it's a very controlled watercolor brush. If you don't have the Wink of Stella, you could instead use a water brush and fill it with water, or use a brush with water, just a regular paintbrush with a very little bit of water. But I really like this Wink of Stella because it has great control over the water, and it adds that fun little shimmer. So you can see I'm not spending much time blending these colors at all. It just is very quick, and it gives that watercolor look without the frustration. Now if you do not have any of these options, you could use regular watercolor to color this in, anything you want, or you can just use regular markers or colored pencils. The nice thing about the Hero Arts black dye ink is that you don't have to worry about it running with watercolors. It's permanent, so it's perfect for any kind of watercoloring that you might want to do. So I finished off these two last succulents with a little bit of green and a little bit of blue to them, because some of my succulents have that blue tint to them. And I also wanted to add a little bit of mint color, so I actually scribbled that marker right onto my craft sheet and picked that up with the brush and added it to my project. Now this second succulent here I just cut out, and I'm going to pop dot it in that open space. But first I need to color my pot. So I'm putting down like a dried marigold color around the edges. Then I'm filling it in with mustard seed, just a little bit of yellow here. And then using my Wink of Stella to pull all that color in towards the center. So if you're using a water brush or just a brush and water, you just pull that color towards the center. There are many types of markers that work with this technique. Now I didn't feel like I had enough orange color, so I'm going in with some ripe persimmon, which is a brighter orange, and putting that towards the edge. I'm just scribbling it onto my craft sheet, picking it up with my brush and pulling it towards my project. Now I wanted a blue kind of sky background behind this, and here's my trick for doing that. I scribble some blue marker, which is the Salty Ocean Distress marker, onto my craft sheet. I pick up some of the color with my brush, put it into the areas closest to my image, and then just blend it out. And you end up with a great sky background that looks watercolored, but you've controlled it so much more by using this brush that doesn't put out as much moisture. Now at this point I decided I was going to trim this down. I didn't know how much blue I needed to put in the background. So before I went anywhere, I decided to go ahead and trim it and then finish up my blue background. I wanted to have this trimmed but have some pieces hanging off of the edge. So I've got my trimmer here and I've picked a little edge that I want to cut, and I just pull my trimmer blade right up to the edge of my stamped image and I stop, and then I continue after the stamped image. So I'm cutting along these lines but stopping when I get close to the stamped image. So some of the pieces actually stick off of the piece that we're cutting here. This is a great way of giving the look that you've actually cut out that entire image, but you really haven't cut it all off. So now I'm just going to go with my craft knife and cut really close up against those lines so that we have a nice clean straight edge around each side. However, we're not cutting through our little succulent pieces that are sticking off the side. After you've gone ahead and reinforced that straight line, you're just going to come in with your scissors and cut around those tiny little bits that are hanging off the edge. Now I got a little carried away here, and this little piece just broke off on me here. So you'll see that it breaks off. However, I'll show you a little bit later how to save that. So this tiny little piece, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out and save that for later, and I promise I'll glue it back in place. So I'm just going ahead and cutting around any pieces of succulent that are hanging off those straight edges that we've cut. Again, this will, when we're done, give us the look that we cut out this whole piece, but we actually didn't. This trick of cutting around an image, cutting it square very close to it and having some pieces hang off, is great when you want to keep that image in focus. If you have a very detailed image that you want to keep in focus, but you don't want to cut it all out. So now it's time to finish up that blue sky, and once we're done with that, I just wanted to have a white cardstock mat for this. So I'm putting little pencil marks where I need to cut my cardstock, and I'll go ahead and trim this little mat. It's just regular white cardstock. This gives a nice finishing look also to the piece that we've already cut. So I'm putting some adhesive on this, and I'll just glue this to the back of the watercolor piece that we've created. Now remember that little piece I accidentally broke off? I'm taking some Ranger Multi-Medium, which is a matte adhesive that is just fantastic, squirting a little bit down there in the spot where that piece of succulent goes. And then I'm taking that little piece and gluing it right on there, and nobody will ever know that I made a mistake. That's a super strong adhesive, so it should stay just fine. Now it's time for the background of this card. I cut a top folding off-white note card that actually has some little flecks in it, so I thought that would be fun. And I'm inking up this new Hero Arts background stamp with soft sand ink. This is a great soft color on cream cardstock. So I'm just going to lay my note card on there and press all around so I can make sure that all the ink transfers onto my note card. Now this will be splotchy and uneven at first. That's normal for Hero Arts shadow inks. But as it dries, it'll be soft and smooth and just beautiful. You can see it's a little splotchy there. But I just love this kind of neutral background that has a soft tone-on-tone look. So I'm just going to use a couple pieces of foam tape and adhere our watercolor piece that's already got the mat on it onto our note card. And I'm going to keep the rest of the card as is. I want to keep this simple so we can keep the succulent piece that we created in focus. Now I did want to show you, it's kind of hard to see the shimmer in the video that you get from that Wink of Stella pen, but when I tilt this in the light, you can see some of the shimmer there. If you don't have that product, another option is to take like a Perfect Pearl pigment powder and add that to some water and watercolor with that, and it gives you that bit of shine. So there's a technique for you where you can literally basically stretch a stamp image and give it a new look, make it bigger, and then also how you can use your markers for a very easy to control watercolor. If you have questions about today's card, please visit the Hero Arts blog, and thanks so much for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you again soon.